I promise you I do have that PhD in computer science. It sometimes is just very hard. So welcome everyone. We're slightly behind the schedule, but I'll make it short. I hope the videos will run. If not, we'll figure it out. We'll figure everything out, right? We're at Build Stuff. Well, we're hackers here. My name is Marta Piekarska. I am Polish by origin. I do live in the UK. And on Friday, it'll be a year since I moved to the UK. And I'm Director of Ecosystem for Hyperledger. We'll talk a bit more about what Hyperledger is and what it is not, and how it falls under Linux Foundation. I am an employee of Linux Foundation, solely focusing on Hyperledger, which is a blockchain project within Linux Foundation. Yes, what is Linux Foundation? This is like the starting point. We have been started 16 years ago as a foundation to promote open source in enterprises and help enterprises figure out how to use open source in a setting that is not necessarily enterprise friendly. Because it is kind of hard to build open source projects and protect your IP, if you think about it. And thus today we have probably the largest global community of lawyers, PR and marketing teams that that are brought together to work with the open source community, developers like yourselves, and enterprises, and create projects across every possible industry to build open source frameworks. And some of the projects you probably heard of, but you'd never even realized that these fall under the Linux Foundation umbrella. So I'll name some and let's see how this quiz goes. Has anyone here heard about Node.js? Wow, okay, that's awesome. Earlier today I was giving a talk at the university in the engineering school in Vilnius, and one person knew about Node.js, so I'm pretty thrilled now. So Node.js is our project under Linux Foundation. Anyone used Kubernetes? Linux Foundation. That's cool. Now probably something much less popular. Automotive grade Linux. Okay, see, I had a hinge. Has anyone driven a BMW or been in a BMW? Okay, see, so BMW runs automotive grade Linux. So you know automotive grade Linux. Let's Encrypt, the biggest certificate authority, so I'm not going to even ask. And thus Hyperledger. Hyperledger is... yeah, sorry, I don't know my slides that well. So Hyperledger is the blockchain project within Linux Foundation that focuses on permanent secure distributed ledgers that makes it easier to create cost-efficient decentralized business networks. We have several frameworks that we built together with we provide the ecosystem for the open source community to build those frameworks. What is important for us to underline is this, and it is something that I can't stop even talking about, which is blockchain is not cryptocurrency. Blockchain is the underlying technology, and cryptocurrency is something that is built on top of it. If you go back and you actually read the literature, blockchain has been introduced in 1990s, roughly. The first papers that mention time-stamping and improving blockchains with time-stamping come from 1992. Cypherpunks were starting to get fascinated by these concepts 1992, 1993. This is not my computer, so these are not my Facebook things. I don't have a Facebook. Now, these concepts have been much earlier than 2008 Satoshi's Nakamoto paper. What Satoshi did was introduced incentives for people to start actually working and developing with the space. The concepts and the incentives, the fact that we actually started solving some of the most urgent problems, like double spend, like how do we achieve the consensus mechanism. This is what Satoshi Nakamoto brought to the table, and that was very, very important. Today, you can kind of look at it as, I don't know, a curve, probably. So we had the blockchain, we had the cryptocurrency fascination. People started looking at, wow, this is something really, really important. And now we're going back to the hype of, oh, blockchain, the underlying technology. Well, this is really important. This is something we really need to be looking at. And let's start applying it to everywhere else, right? So that's the curve or the tide starts to look back at blockchain and not cryptocurrency. So now the question is, why blockchain technologies for business? Why are we even looking at blockchain technologies for business? Why not stick to Bitcoin and forget about the other stuff? Well, you can think about it as Bitcoin being, and I know some of you may start throwing tomatoes at me or other things you gain during lunch. You can think of Bitcoin as maybe some kind of a interesting proof of concept, or maybe deployment, more than deployment of technology on top of blockchain. But there are other proof of concepts and deployments out there on top of blockchain. But that is one of applications of blockchain technology. And there is a whole spectrum. The global ledgers and ledgers out there are applicable to different use cases. So this spectrum is really a spectrum. And you hear about the permissioned public blockchains, you hear about the private and private versus public, and this is a very complicated world, so bear with me here for a second. So you have the permissionless public blockchains, and this is your Ethereum and Bitcoin world. And I tend to think of it in terms of accessibility and visibility world, and define permissioned and permissionless on who can write, and public and private on who can read from a blockchain. And I am perfectly fine if you want to say, well, I don't agree with it. This is a different way of how I think about it. But this is my personal view. This is how I try to wrap my hand around this world. So if you have the permissionless public blockchain, this is the one like Bitcoin, where anyone can submit a transaction and anyone can read from that blockchain, right? There's no threshold to join that network. Then you have the whole other spectrum, the permissioned private blockchain. This would be, and I realized I didn't have time to fix that slide, I'll do it later. This would be your medical records. System, where only your doctors could submit information to that blockchain, and you don't really want your friend to write to a blockchain of your medical records, right? That would be not very smart idea. You only want certain people to write to a blockchain that holds your medical records, and only you and your doctors should be able to access those medical records. So this is your permissioned private blockchain. But there is a whole middle section where you have permissionless private blockchains, where anyone can submit to that blockchain, anyone can write to it, but only certain people can read from it, like a voting system. We all can go voting, but only certain people, only your government, can read from it. And then there's permissioned public blockchain, like your land titles, right? Anyone should be able to check if you own land, but only your government should be able to issue you a certificate saying you bought that house, or only your university should be able to issue you your university grade, but anyone should be able to check if you went to a university. And on top of that, we obviously have smart contracts. Smart contracts are a really great concept where you can put complex programs that are stored and executed on a blockchain, and then start executing them, which is a really interesting concept. I know I also hate the name, because what is smart and smart contracts, and why are we even using that name? I'm sorry. I'm just sorry for that name. Also to the lawyers, because lawyers are trying to kill us now, because we are trying to also introduce legal smart contracts, which is even harder, because just the fact that we are putting something in a digital form doesn't mean that we are smart about it. But fact that we can put code and make it independent from people, and make it so that it starts being executed despite people trying to challenge it or mess with it, makes it a very interesting story. So imagine that farmer in Sacramento, because it's cold here in Vilnius right now, so Sacramento is a nice place to be in your headspace, and he has a quite opposite problem to the one right now, which is it's very hot there. And so if for 100 days his crops are exposed to very high temperature, what happens is his crops are ruined, and he can't sell them. So he can get his crops insured. That for 100 days or more, the temperature is above 40 degrees Celsius, he will get paid by the insurance company. Well, the problem is that the insurance company will usually, if they sign just a regular contract, and I'm sure you all had that problem with insurance company, will try mess with him and say, well, you know what, it was actually 39.5 for most of the time. Or, well, actually it wasn't 100 days, it was just 99 days, or something like that. Well, if we sign a smart contract, we put a so-called smart meter, because everything is smart today. So we put that smart meter on his farm and measure temperature automatically. And on the day 100 of temperature 100 or more, 40 or more, what happens is that the funds from the insurance company get automatically released from their bank account to his bank account, and poof, everything has happened. And there's no way for the insurance company to dispute him, and there's no way for him to do anything about it. It just happens. And if there were just 90 days, then there were just 90 days, and he can't dispute the insurance company and try playing around with the weather forecast. So that's why smart contracts and this whole digital world is so exciting to us, because it also helps just regular people, normal people, improve their lives in a very simple way. And this technology is not something that they need to understand. And this is the message that we are trying to get through to the enterprises and to the technologists as well, who are very excited about the technology, and they really want to talk about it to your general public or to your mother. Well, if my mother really needs to understand blockchain, that I'm really worried about. Because honestly, what my mom needs to know is needs to see the pretty UI. And the back end of it, the fact that it runs on a blockchain, she doesn't need to know that. She just needs to get her insurance back. So what are the early adopters in the industries? First of all, financial services. These are the ones that are like running all the way out there to deployment. And it's not the cryptocurrency world, it's the banking services that want to get their reconciliation on a blockchain. Then there is the supply chain, which is really excited about and blockchain technologies because they lead to greater efficiency as well as safer and more ethical standards through the ability to really prove the honesty of the transactions. So your sustainable supply chain, for instance. Also combining it with IoT to prove that the supply chain is in steady conditions. Also things like responsibility chain. So when multiple parties are participating in a supply chain, fact that no one was bribed in that whole chain of action. And then healthcare, which is a really interesting field because on one hand, it's a very slow process, and healthcare is not an early adopter by any means. Like your doctors are the ones who avoid computers like hell, but on the other hand, it's the one that needs adoption very quickly. So there's a lot of education happening, and in the same time, there's a lot of education and willingness for adoption, but also resentment there, or like slowness. Yeah. So how did Hyperledger start? It actually started in a very interesting way. So roughly 2 years ago, we have this Linux Foundation. We have all of those members of Linux Foundation, all of the industry partners, and they start coming to Jim Zemlin, our executive direction of Linux Foundation, and they say, "Hey Jim, you know, how did you hear about this thing called Bitcoin?" And Jim says, "Well, obviously, yes, I do read newspapers." And people say, "Well, what do you want to do about it?" And Jim said, and if you think about it, 2 years ago, that was pretty brilliant at the time. Jim says, well, Bitcoin is not something that really fits into the model of Linux Foundation because it really is not about enterprises, not about the collaboration of industries, but the underlying technology. Well, this is something that is really exciting and we should start doing something about it. And that's how Hyperledger started, right? About that collaboration of enterprises and building open source frameworks that will bring blockchain for enterprises. And we started with 30 founding members. Among them were Intel, IBM, Digital Assets, Hitachi, I don't remember some of the other ones right now. And we had 2 funding projects. We had Hyperledger Fabric, donated originally by Digital Assets and IBM. And we had donated by Intel, Hyperledger Sawtooth. So it was a fairly small group, intimate group of people that really wanted to see where this thing goes. And our statement was that Hyperledger will be a collaborative and global open source software community that is hosted by the Linux Foundation and will advance blockchain technologies for business. Fast forward 2 years since we launched, we have 4 tools. We started with none. Today we have 4 tools. We have 5 frameworks instead of 2. We have 1 production release, which is Hyperledger Fabric 1.0. And soon, by the end of the year, probably we'll have another production release of Hyperledger Sawtooth. We grew from 30 Hyperledger members to 180. We have 12 active working community groups. We have 80 meetups worldwide. We have actually a very active community meetup group here in Vilnius, which is meeting tomorrow as well. We have like a running schedule every 2 to 3 months. So next meetup in Vilnius is tomorrow. We have meetup participants all over the world. Media coverage. We have a really good media coverage. So it's really, really growing. The momentum is amazing. And this Hyperledger umbrella, this Linux Foundation umbrella, we kind of decided to mirror it to to our frameworks and tools and the way that Hyperledger works. So because we do believe that there won't be one Uber ledger, right? We won't end up with dividing and conquering and removing all the code out there. We need to collaborate, and we need to provide space for everyone to collaborate. The way that, like, you know, I don't think that anyone here would want to eat brownie till the rest of their life for dessert. Probably you want some variety in your desserts. The same way you don't want to eat, you don't want to develop only in one framework. For various reasons, you want to have various frameworks. So you want to have your Hyperledger Indie because that's your identity framework. This is the framework that focuses really on how do we solve identity in various cases for use the identity in blockchain. Then there's Hyperledger Fabric, which is written in Go. It uses chain code, which is smart contracts in this case. It is very plug and play, very modular approach, very mature code, really used in both supply chain and financial technologies. Very interesting concept. Then you have Hyperledger Iroha, which is very tightly written, very lightweight. Its applications are mostly focused on mobile applications. It has demos also in like Raspberry Pi even. You can run SPV proofs on mobile devices. That's how tightly the memory management is handled. You have Hyperledger Sawtooth, which is also a very mature framework. And this one is targeted really for flexibility and scalability. It's written in Python. It uses a different consensus mechanism. So obviously none of them use proof of work. Fabric uses its own Byzantine fault-tolerant mechanism. Iroha uses a consensus mechanism called Sumeragi. And Sawtooth uses proof of elapsed time, which is a consensus mechanism that uses a secure enclave on SGX chips, and basically leverages the fact that you can win a lottery, and the one who wins the shortest amount of time on the chip is the one to win. So it is also like very ecologically friendly because it uses least energy, not most energy. And then there's Hyperledger Borrow, which is our Ethereum collaboration with Ethereum community, and it implements the Ethereum virtual machine on Hyperledger frameworks. All of this is open source, in case I haven't mentioned it enough times. All of this is open source. You can download the code, you can experiment with the code. All of this is under Apache license, right? So you can go to our website, into our GitHub repositories, and do all of this without any kind of membership. There's no barrier to join. There are tools. Composer, Explorer, Cello are your three deployment, explore what is happening, and DevOps tools. And there's Quilt, which is our youngest code proposal. Quilt is the interledger protocol implementation in Java. So the standard interledger protocol that comes from like Ripple and NTT, implemented in Java. And yeah, that's it. Can I play this? Okay, let's do it this way, because I really want to show you some of these videos. Oh, here. Okay.
Dozens of companies are working together, building a blockchain blockchain fabric that can support production business networks. The work started last year with a simple framework to test the interaction between applications and secure blockchain networks, and it's allowed us to test use cases in supply chain, capital markets, manufacturing, and healthcare. Here's what we learned. First, we learned that permissioned blockchain networks that require every peer to execute every transaction, maintain a ledger, and run consensus can't scale very well. And they can't support true private transactions and confidential contracts. So the Hyperledger community designed Fabric V1 to deliver a truly modular, scalable, and secure foundation for industrial blockchain solutions. The most notable change is that peers are now decoupled into two separate runtimes with three distinct roles: endorser, committer, and consenter. Here's how it works. Say you run an organic market in California, and I grow radishes on my farm in Chile. You and I are on a blockchain network that supports transactions between various markets, growers, shippers, banks, and others. Say I agree to sell you my radishes at a special low price, but I need the other markets that buy from me to continue buying at the standard price. They shouldn't be able to execute our confidential agreement and find out the details of our deal. In fact, if they aren't part of the deal, the transaction shouldn't appear on their ledger. Fabric V1 handles all this. My app looks up your identity from a membership service and then sends the transactions only to our peers. Both of our peers will generate a result. In this two-party agreement, the transaction requires both of us to render the same result. But in transactions with more parties, other rules can apply. Then the peers send the validated transaction back to the application, which sends it to a consensus cloud for ordering. And then the ordered transactions are sent back to the peers and committed to the ledger. But to get my radishes to your market, there are many other parties involved. Some need to know that my radishes have been verified and checked into a shipping container. Others need to handle bills of lading, customs inspections, financing, insurance, but most of these parties don't need to know about our special price. Now think about our transaction running on a network handling all the markets, all the farms, shippers, facilitators, the whole supply chain. This is the same pattern needed by many industries. Anywhere we need to manage confidential obligations to each other without passing everything through a central authority. V1 delivers one network with everyone working together while ensuring confidentiality, scalability, and security. And that's what we're building right now. And we can use your help. So, how do we get there? Go to hyperledger.org to find out.
Okay. So that's about Hyperledger Fabric. Okay. Full screen. Sorry for that. I guess the PDFs doesn't handle it. So we have a very modular approach. We really want to be able to mix and match and do kind of takes a consensus mechanism from one framework, put it on the other. One of the proofs of that is that Borrow, the Ethereum virtual machine, now runs on Sawtooth, so you can mix it with Sawtooth frameworks. Our goals are really to create enterprise-grade open-source distributed ledgers and provide the neutral, open, community-driven infrastructures to build technical communities, educate the public about the possibilities, and promote our community of communities. Now, what I would like to talk about for the rest of the talk is industry use cases, so how people really use these frameworks. What are the interesting things? So the first and most like financial focused one is the cross-border payments. This is a one that comes over and over and over again in various countries. So this is just an example. Right now there is a big fintech event in Singapore happening where another like 2 or 3 of those are just being announced. But this is a good example because it's very well established. So our members, Swift, ANZ, Wells Fargo's, BNY Mellon, and BNP Paribas joined together to try to kind of figure out what happens and how can they use blockchain to solve a very serious problem. Because one thing is when we transact between each other and we try to move assets between each other, but what happens when banks try to move between each other? And while we think of banks as those very old institutions that like to be very stale, they actually have a huge problem because keeping records of who moved money from one bank to the other requires really trusted third party and clearing houses and bookkeeping and piles of documents. And this is very inefficient, costs a lot of money, causes usually huge losses because someone somewhere didn't keep the record properly. And also the spreads and costs of keeping that record tracking are very high. So they actually decided to replace that system with blockchain. They created a POC build with Hyperledger Fabric, and actually it works. And now they are looking into how use that in deployment. So hopefully we'll see that implemented. The next use case is healthcare records. Looking at how healthcare can be improved with blockchain, there are several aspects here. So first thing is healthcare records. So Change Healthcare, GEM, Hashed Health, Patientary, Kaiser Permanente joined together, looking at sharing healthcare records within single country and then across borders. What happens today is that doctors don't trust each other and they don't have quick access to data. So you go to a doctor and your doctor will say, well, you know, it's easier for me to run this test than try to access the database, or actually I don't have access to the database, or I don't trust the doctor who did that test, so I'll just run the test again. And you end up with 5 X-rays. I don't have to tell you that 5 X-rays are much worse than 1 X-ray, right? So this is why we are trying to create a situation where all of this is recorded on a blockchain, where it is the trust is the need for trust is removed. If you travel from one country to the other, the data would be accessible in a much faster way. The other part of it is repeatable prescriptions, where you don't need to go to your doctor because your pharmacy could trust the fact that you can get a prescription. Interstate medical licensing, so that you don't have the situation where you can't trust the fact that your doctor is eligible for to be at, or well, has the right to practice. Same with university degrees, same with many other things, but interstate medical licensing is an actual pilot program in collaboration with Hashed Health and Hyperledger Fabric. Blockchain, state of Illinois is the part. Another interesting information for you guys is that actually Dutch Chain Initiative, so the government-backed blockchain initiative in the Netherlands, also is putting all of the medical records in blockchain. The ethical seafood movement is another one, and let me try putting that video on.
Seafood restaurant in Boston, Massachusetts. Rich strives to serve only the freshest, highest quality fish to his patrons, but he often has difficulty knowing exactly where it was caught, how it got to his restaurant, or if it's even the right species of fish. From ocean to table, the fish supply chain is difficult to track and usually follows this pattern. The fish is caught by a commercial fisherman in the ocean. The fisherman then sells the fish to a market, processor, or broker. A distributor then transports the fish to a restaurant or grocery store for a consumer to purchase. Rich typically only buys from 1 or 2 fish distributors that he has built a foundation of trust and personal history with. He'd like to expand his menu by adding some different kinds of seafood from other distributors, but he worries about integrity, and for good reason. He recently read a study by Oceana which showed that 33% of fish purchased from retail outlets is incorrectly labeled, and that illegal fishing represents losses between $10 to $23 billion worldwide. Rich knows that mislabeled and illegally sourced fish could hurt his customers, his restaurant's reputation, and the environment of our planet. Fortunately for Rich, and others in the seafood industry, Sawtooth Lake blockchain technology can provide an immutable record of the provenance and lineage of various goods, like fish. In combination with Internet of Things-enabled sensors, Sawtooth Lake can manage the ownership and journey of fish from ocean to table. Sensors can be attached to fish the moment they are harvested, immediately and continuously recording data, such as the location and temperature of the fish. Now, Rich can validate when and where his fish was caught and that it was stored properly on ice while it was transported. The Sawtooth Lake platform can also manage the chain of custody of fish, enabling ownership to be transferred and traded on the blockchain according to smart contracts. With Sawtooth Lake as a traceability blockchain, Rich can easily see which fishermen meet his quality standards and feels comfortable doing business with new tradesmen. When he serves up a new special to a cherished customer, he can confidently and accurately assure her it's the type of fish she ordered, it was stored at safe temperatures, when and where it was caught, how long it took to get to her plate, and the fish's name. Just kidding. Sawtooth Lake blockchain technology can be used for a wide variety of applications, from capital markets to international trade. The Internet of Things ties the physical world to the digital world, with Sawtooth Lake recording the generated data in a way that all parties can trust its accuracy and completeness. This is extremely useful for tracking perishable goods, like fish. These sensors can track many key parameters such as location, temperature, humidity, motion, shock, and tilt. This technology could be added to any package or sensitive good you're entrusting to other parties. The blockchain will ensure the data is secure and tamper-proof, so that you know what you're getting and that you get what you pay for. Sawtooth Lake creates a digital platform enabling physical traceability in a trustless world.
And then finally we have the diamond supply chain, a very famous use case by now. So how can you track the blood diamonds or make sure that they are not bloody? That's SAP and Everledger combined together based on Sawtooth as well. And verifiable IDs for refugees, making sure that we can give identity to 1.3 billion people in the world that do not have identity. Very important project. And one last thing, for those of you who care about authorship, which I'm sure many of you do, tracking rights, music rights, content rights on a blockchain. And this is a very interesting one because it shows what I really like to tell people, which is blockchain is just part of your solution. It is not the solution to your problem. It is the technical background or the technical tool that will help solve your problem, but it has to be part of a solution that you build in general. So here, as you can see, blockchain is just that purple circle right there. But all of the other things, these are all of the other all of the other pieces of that puzzle that had to be implemented in order to build that solution. And so this is the company that is based in New York City that has been built with Hyperledger. What is also really interesting there is something that just to make a point, Dot Blockchain Media is not a member of Hyperledger. Because we are open source and because there is no barrier, to start developing and whatever, they just downloaded the code, they started developing, they are out there selling their solution, and they are doing it in open source because that's the model of open source, right? There is benefit to joining Hyperledger, and many people benefit from it, but there is no requirement to develop with Hyperledger frameworks and being a member in the same time. There are ways to participate, and all of these ways are completely open to anyone. You can subscribe to Hyperledger mailing lists. You can attend Hyperledger Hackfests and upcoming blockchain events. The next Hackfest, which is not a hackathon, it's an event that where we talk about the future of Hyperledger frameworks, how can we collaborate, and where to move forward our frameworks. This one is in Lisbon. In early December, we can get the latest development updates from our wiki. We have discussions on our Rocket chat. This is the main channel for discussions. We obviously can download the bug reports and or file bugs in our bug database. You can join the local Hyperledger meetup in your city. And of course, participate in working groups and meetings, which are virtual. If you're interested in our industry peers and partners, here is a list. And a longer list, so I told you it's 180. And yeah, I have time for questions if you have questions. Otherwise, I have one more video, but here's a question. So
well, I don't know much about blockchain yet, but my question is: so you actually provide kind of a framework that we can use to actually create new blockchain network, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because every time we implement this tool, this framework, we actually trying to create a new blockchain network.
Yeah.
So this is the first question. So you just answered that.
You deploy a new blockchain, yeah.
Yes, definitely. And the second question is, I'm not sure if you already said that, but did you solve the problem of having some of those blocks, let's say transactions that are being kept private and still allow you to actually keep the blockchain more or less transparent or continuous, you know what I mean? Because talking about Bitcoin, right? Whenever you create new transaction, whenever you dig new Bitcoin, right? So new transaction is being created inside of the blockchain network. This is how I understand things. If I'm not correct, just please correct me if I'm wrong.
So because we create private or permission blockchains, all of the transactions and all of the blocks on the blockchain are kept within that group of people. So they are kept in some way private.
So only
participants of that network can see what is happening.
So it's not like Bitcoin, so it's like transparent to everyone.
Yes.
It's just kind of a private network that will actually
Yes.
allow you to track all
Yeah, that was the first video was talking about it, that you choose within the channels, you choose who participates in which transactions.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Yes?
Right, so also an example with Bitcoin is that since every transaction is public, its validity is verified by a lot of people. So it's like a public thing that everyone agrees that this is the truth. Who verifies the transactions and make them valid in a private blockchain? Is there like a single authority, like a bank?
No, it's same thing. There is a consensus mechanism. There are different consensus mechanisms depending on which framework you're using, but it's the participants of that network. It's just a smaller network.
But it's just sorry.
Yes, it's automatically. And the difference is obviously the security assurances on the Bitcoin blockchain are done through the fact that it's such a big network. And so, you know, you kind of rely on the fact that there are so many people and they are anonymous and so on. Here, the threshold quite often is that the level of participation is high enough that you kind of naturally trust it, right? So if it's a consortium of banks, the banks naturally trust each other. And so they trust that if they make a consensus, it is a valid one. They don't have an incentive to cheat.
Not so much blockchain, but more about smart contracts. With a normal paper contract, you can kind of, well, someone can change the terms, and the other person, the other end can say, oh, this doesn't work for me anymore, so they can back out. How does that work with smart contract? Is it, once it's set in stone, no one can back out of it?
If in a smart contract, if you make amendments, you can just not agree to the amendments. But you can't, first of all, there is a beauty, right? Which is if you make changes, everyone's informed about the changes. So there is no way of sneaking in changes, which is the regular world. And then you just make amendments that you don't have to agree to.
Okay. So you actually can't, like in a blockchain, right? So you can't modify some transaction in the middle of the
yeah.
chain, right?
Yeah. Yeah?
Probably related to that, if you go to your example of the Sacramento farmer, which has a contract to the insurance company based on temperature sensor. Suppose the temperature sensor later appears to be tampered with. What's your take on ways to override the contract that's currently in place? Because the money is already transferred.
Well, so probably you want to have like 2 or 3 monitors in place and make sure. So this goes back to blockchain is only part of that solution, and smart contract is only part of that solution. You have to have in place a whole system that is secure and safe. Putting something on a blockchain does not automatically make it magically better. Does that answer your question?
There's no higher authority that you can go to and say, look, it's obviously been tampered, there's a bug in our system.
Well, probably you should have something like that, yeah. Yes? I thought there was a question in the back? No.
So whenever I want to make some kind of a transaction with third party, right? So we have to agree on some conditions, let's say that, and we actually have to create this transaction somehow, right? So how do you handle that? How the next block in the chain is being created? Is kind of a, based on mutual agreement, or I'm being a little bit abstract on this question probably. But I'm thinking about the internals of your network. So every time you want to create a new transaction, it just happens?
Who mines that transaction?
There is no mining process included. Yeah, there is no mining in terms of blockchain. It's added to a channel. It depends on the framework. Again, Sawtooth has it slightly different. Fabric has it slightly different. To be honest, I'll send you off to our white paper. I'm happy to share with you the white paper that describes every single framework separately, because we will spend here in the next 20 minutes diving into the details of each consensus mechanism and in having in mind in time.
So basically you do provide kind of different flavors or mechanisms of having that consensus.
Yeah.
Being agreed.
Okay, I think I gave you back 2 minutes of your life. Thank you.